Sometimes what happens, you try to avoid before the person comes to hit you itself. That is nothing but the reflex action, because the brain is able to very soon receive the signal stating that something bad is going to happen. I need to get away from it. Extends further to form a thick choroid, which is called as ciliary body. This ciliary body extends further to form the iris. So photoreceptor cells are nothing but the rods and the cones themselves, right? So this produces a signal, and that signal will actually generate an action potential in the ganglion cells through the bipolar cells. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to another session on chapter 21, that is neural control and coordination. I am Dr. Divya, biology faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about the transmission of impulses, and also we studied about the structure of the human brain. In today's session, we shall discuss about the reflex action, and we shall discuss about various sense organs, and we shall discuss in detail the parts of the eye. So to begin with today's session, let's learn what reflex action and reflex arc are. So reflex action. So say sometimes you put your hand by mistake, or you dip your finger into a hot bowl of water. What happens? Suddenly you pull your finger out, right? Will you keep it there for longer time if the water is boiling in 100 degree? No, because you will feel something. You'll feel that pain or that burning sensation, which will very soon in a second make you remove your finger out of it, right? So that is nothing but reflex action, wherein very quickly the messages from the tip of your finger are sent to the brain, and from brain back to the muscles in the tip of your finger. So that is nothing but the reflex action. So the entire process of response to a peripheral nervous stimulation that occurs involuntary. This is involuntary. Of course, you would have put your finger by knowing, but unknowingly you will just remove it off within a second. So it is an involuntary action that actually occurs in a second, which is not under your control and without our conscious effort. We don't even think for a second, right? No consciousness is involved here. Within a second, we'll just put it off. Or somebody is coming very close to you to hit your eyes or somewhere, you just close your eyes, your eyelids close in terms for protection, right? So all that is nothing but it is an involuntary process that occurs without we knowing about it or without a second thought, and it requires the involvement of part of the central nervous system, which is called, and this is called as the reflex action. So it is nothing but within a span of second, the message is sent to the central nervous system, and from the central nervous system back to the target organ, which will very soon tell you that you need to remove your hand, and you'll not even have a second to think about it. Therefore, it is a involuntary mechanism. And the reflex pathway, it comprises of mainly one efferent neuron. So efferent neuron is the receptor. So where is the efferent neuron present? It is the receptor. Why is it the receptor? Because you dip your finger into a bowl of hot water. Very soon the message is sent from the finger to your central nervous system. So it is sent via what? It is sent via the efferent nerves. So therefore efferent nerves is the one that is receiving the signal that something is hot there. And one more is the efferent nerve, or it is called as the effector or the exciter. Now the efferent nerve is from the central nervous system to the tip of your finger, which will very soon pass a message to the tip of your finger saying that you need to remove your finger very, very quickly. So that is the efferent nerve neuron, and appropriately they are arranged in a series. So this width diagram I had shown in the previous session. So you can go back and take a look at it. You'll understand even better. So as you can see here, I have taken the diagram that is there in the NCERT textbook itself. So a stimulus is being applied. What is a stimulus? Somebody is trying to hit you, somebody is trying to pinch you or hurt you or whatever, that is an external stimulus. Here there is a hammer and that hammer is being banged on the leg. That is a kind of stimulus, right? So when that stimulus, when somebody is hitting on your leg or hitting on your leg with a hammer, what happens? Here the receptor cells are there. Where are the receptor cells? They are present in the muscle spindle fibers. So these receptor cells, they will receive the signal stating that something is happening onto my leg and it is causing a pain. Now that information will be sent by the efferent nerve to the brain, which is a part of the central nervous system. So where is it sent? It is sent to the grey matter. As I told you, all the communication, memory, everything depends on the grey matter. Where is the grey matter? Grey matter is present in that cerebral hemisphere of the brain is nothing but the grey matter. Why is it grey? Because it contains a lot of nerve fibers which provide the grey color to it. So there, this grey matter will receive the signal, and that signal in the form of what? In the form of chemicals called as neurotransmitters, and that signal will get excited by the motor neurons, and then it will be carried by the efferent nerve to the muscle, back to the muscle, from the muscle to the brain, that is the grey matter of the brain, via what? Via the efferent nerves, and from the brain back to the muscle via the efferent nerves. Now, a body will respond. What it will respond? We'll try to move back or we'll try to resist. So, that is what happens here. So, this is the function of the efferent neuron and the efferent neuron. So, moving further, what happens exactly? I'll tell you in detail. The efferent neuron, it receives a signal from the sensory organ. Here, which is the sensory organ? Somebody is hammering the leg. Now, the sensory organ is a skin. Our first sensory organ is a skin, right? Because the hammer is first touching our epithelial cells, that is the skin. Now, the skin cells will receive the signal. That signal will move to the muscles. From the muscles, it will be carried via and so when the signals are received on the receptor cells, or in this particular case sensory organs in particular, and an impulse is being created, the impulse transmits or is transported via a dorsal nerve route into the central nervous system. What is the dorsal? Dorsal means upper, ventral means lower. Dorsal, it is nothing but the efferent pathway. Through the efferent neuron or the nerve fiber, it is transmitted to the central nervous system. Which central nervous system? To the brain here. Now, after that, from the brain or the central nervous system, the efferent neuron carries the signal from the central nervous system to the effector. Which is the effector here? Again, the muscle. The muscle is both the receiver and the effector, right? Because when a person is hammering on your leg, your epithelial cells and the muscles are the one that receives the signal. They transmit it via the efferent pathway or the efferent neuron to the brain or the central nervous system. From the brain, the efferent neuron carries the neurotransmitters or signals or impulse to the victim tissue here, which is that it is the muscle, or it is carried to the effector. So, effector here is the muscle. So, the stimulus and response thus forms a reflex action. Very soon, within a second, all this, can you imagine, it will happen within a second. Will you wait for 5 minutes until the person is hitting and then you try to avoid? No, right? Once you feel, sometimes what happens, you try to avoid before the person comes to hit you itself. That is nothing but the reflex action, because the brain is able to very soon receive the signal stating that something bad is going to happen. I need to get away from it. So that is nothing but the reflex action. So the stimulus and response forms a reflex arc, and it is known as the knee-jerk reflex. So what is the knee-jerk reflex? The person is, somebody is hitting on the leg of a person with a hammer and you're trying to move your knees, you're trying to move, or I can show it with the hand here. Somebody is trying to pinch you, you try to get away from it by moving. So here it's elbow, right? You're trying to jerk your elbow. Similarly here, when it is a leg, we are trying to jerk our knees here. So that is why it is called as the knee jerk reflex. So this is about the reflex action and the reflex arc. So now, since we know about the reflex action and the reflex arc, I told you the first signal is received by the sensory organs. So what are the different sensory organs and how these sensory organs receive these signals and how do they process this particular signal, we shall see. So sensory organs, they detect all types of changes in the environment, and based on that, they send appropriate signals to the central nervous system where all the inputs are processed and analyzed. That is true, right? Say for example, our body is also capable of understanding the climate. Whenever it is cold, you run in to your house, you try to keep yourself warm by wearing a sweater. How did you feel that you're getting cold? Or if it is hot, you try to switch on the AC or you try to keep yourself cool by drinking something or try to switch on the fan and all that. How do you know that your body is feeling hot? So, any kind of environmental stimulus or environment changes or any kind of danger that is coming towards you, you try to escape from that. So, for that, our sense organs mainly help, right? So, previously when explaining about reflex action, I told you the sense organ that is involved there is the skin. Similarly, here there are different types of sense organs that are involved. There also we feel cold. There also the sense organ that is involved in is the skin, right? Because our skin is the first part of a body that is exposed to the external environment. And once they are exposed to the external environment, they will send the signals from where? Via the efferent nerve. The signals will be sent to the central nervous system, and in the central nervous system, especially our brain, all the messages are stored and they are processed and they are made into such a form, and the signals are sent back to our respective places via the efferent nerve, telling us what we need to do. That is when we understand, okay, our body is feeling cold, I need to go and wear a sweater. So that is how it is done. So signals are then sent to different parts or centers of the brain, and this is how we can sense the changes in the environment. So now let's talk about the different sense organs that we have. So we are able to smell things by our nose. We are able to taste by tongue, hear by our ear, and see objects by the eyes, right? So the different sense organs involved here: the nose, the tongue, the ear, and the eyes. Even skin is also a kind of a sense organ. So how exactly the messages are transported, we shall look into. So first, talking about the nose, the sense organ nose. So why do we use our nose? We use our nose to smell something, be it a pleasant or smell or a bad smell or an odor, right? So the nose contains, inside our nose, what is there? It is covered by a mucous membrane. In that mucous membrane, there are some cells which are called as the mucus coated receptors. So these receptor cells, so in biology, whenever the term receptor comes, you should understand it means to receive something. Receptor, to receive something. Here, what are they receiving? They are receiving some signals in the form of smell. Because I am talking about nose, I am talking about smell. If I was talking about the eyes, I would have talked about the vision or the image of an object. But I am talking about the nose. So here, it receives signals that are nothing but in the form of smell, right? And these receptors are specialized for receiving the sense of smell, and therefore they are called as the olfactory receptors. So inside our nose, we have a mucous membrane. In that mucous membrane, there are some mucus receptor cells which are called as the olfactory receptors. Olfactory, anything related to the nose, you call it as olfactory. So here, these olfactory receptors, they receive the smell, be it a bad one or a good one. So these olfactory receptors are made up of olfactory epithelium, and they contain 3 types of cells. And the neurons, so what are the 3 types of cells? Let's look into. So the neurons of the olfactory epithelium, they extend from the outside environment directly into a pair of broad bean-sized organs which are called as the olfactory bulb. So one is the olfactory bulb, and these olfactory bulb are nothing but the extension of the brain's limbic system. So, a brain receives signals. What are involved in that? Both the medulla oblongata and the limbic system of the brain. So, go back to the previous session and have a look at the session. You will understand even better. So, here the extension of the brain, the limbic system along with the medulla oblongata, they are the ones that actually receive the signals and they send it to the bean-sized organs called as the olfactory bulb. So, olfactory bulb, where are they present? They are present in the olfactory epithelium region. So, olfactory epithelium is nothing but the covering. In that olfactory epithelium, what is the mucus cells are also there. What are those mucus cells called as? They are called as the olfactory receptors because they are the ones that actually receive the signals. So, these actually send the messages to the brain's limbic system and that is how the messages are retrieved there and those messages are sent back to the particular target organ, that is the nose, to make us identify what smell it is. So, that was about the nose. Now, talking about one more sense organ, that is the tongue. So, tongue, it actually detects taste through taste buds. So, if you just look at your tongue in the mirror, you can see small tiny outgrowths on the tongue, right? Like when you get goosebumps, how your hand will feel. Just like that, as if rashes has occurred. Just like that on a tongue also, it will be there. So, that is nothing but the taste buds and these taste buds contain gustatory receptors. So, in tongue, what is the receptors? It is gustatory receptors. In the nose, what is the receptors? It is olfactory receptors. So, these gustatory receptors, they are the ones that actually taste food, actually which provides for us, which helps us to understand the taste of food or the sip of a drink. And once the drink or food, whatever we are eating, comes in contact with the gustatory receptors that are present in the taste buds of the tongue, the brain will integrate the differential input from the taste buds and a complex flavor is perceived. That is true, right? The food that we eat can have salt in it, can have sugar, can be sour, whatever. It has a group of taste. It has lots of taste in it. All that taste gets detected. Right, when you're eating some South Indian food or something, you can easily understand whether they have added garlic, ginger, whether they've added coriander, everything. But how do you know when that food is prepared all together, but still you're able to find the taste? It is all because of the gustatory receptor cells that are actually present in the taste bud of the tongue. They actually sends the messages to the brain to interpret those taste and then send it back to the tongue. So, that is how it is done here. So, therefore, here both nose and tongue, they detect the dissolved chemicals and the chemical sense of gustation, which is called as chemical sense of taste, and the olfactory and the smell are functionally similar and interrelated. So, both the nose and the tongue are quite interrelated to each other because sometimes when you have something, you can say that the taste of this food is like the smell of something. We tell that sometimes, right? It is because the smell and the taste, they go hand in hand. So, this is about the sense organ, that is the tongue. So, you can see here the tongue has a lot of small taste buds. So, these round taste buds that you can see, they are the taste buds present on the tongue and in each taste bud, what is there? There is a gustatory receptor cell that is present. And this gustatory receptor cell is actually the one that senses the taste and via the cranial nerves, they send it to the brain to detect exactly what all different tastes are present in the food. So, both nose and the tongue both play a very important role in tasting the food that we eat. Next, moving to one more sense organ, that is the eye. So, eye we shall study in detail in this particular session. There is one more sense organ, the ear, that we shall study in the coming session in detail. So, this is a very important question which comes for 5 marks. They can either ask, draw a neat diagram of the eye, or they can ask to explain the structure of the eye. So, our paired eyes are located in sockets of the skull. So, if you have seen a skull, you can see 2 holes in the skull, right? That is called as the sockets of the eye. And the eyes are usually situated in these sockets. So, let's study in detail about the parts of the eyes now. So, an adult human eyeball is almost spherical in structure. That is true, right? Our human eyeball, it is spherical. You can just see here, this is the entire eyeball that we call it as. So it is almost spherical in structure, and the wall of the eyeball is made up of three important layers. So the external layer, it is made up of dense connective tissue and it is called as the sclera. So what is the external layer of the eye? It is called as the sclera. So sclera forms the external layer of the eye. Can you see here? This one. This portion is the external layer. And what is sclera made up of? So sclera is nothing but it is made up of a dense connective tissue. And the anterior portion of the eye of this layer is called as the cornea. So anterior portion is called as the cornea. So this is the sclera, that is the outermost portion. This sclera extends anteriorly to form one more layer of the eye, which is called as the cornea. So cornea is the anterior portion. Next, moving further, the middle layer, which is called as choroid. As you can see, this is the middle layer. It is called as choroid. So the middle layer, it contains many blood vessels and therefore it looks bluish in color. So because of the presence of our veins, what is the color of the veins? Either somewhat greenish blue, right? So because a lot of blood vessels are present in that particular choroid region, this choroid region is blue color. It is blue in color. So which is what is choroid? It is the middle layer of the eye. So what are the three layers of the eye? The outermost layer, which is called as sclera. Then we have this anterior region of the eye, which is called as the cornea. Then the middle layer, which is called as choroid, which is blue in color because of the presence of large number of blood vessels there. And the choroid layer is very thin and it is present over the posterior 2/3 of the eyeball. So if you can see here, 2/3 of the eyeball is covered by, if you can see here, this is the middle layer. So almost 2/3 is covered by the choroid. 2/3 of eyeball is covered by choroid. So that is the layer of the eye, that is choroid, covers 2/3 of the eyeball and it becomes thin, thick. That is, what did I tell you? The choroid layer is thin. To what extent? About 2/3 of the eyeball is covered by thin choroid layer and this choroid layer later becomes thick in the anterior part of the to form the ciliary body. So if you can see here, in the anterior part, it forms the ciliary body and it is thick. It is same. It is the extension of the middle layer, that is choroid only. But usually the 2/3 of the eyeball is surrounded by thin choroid layer and extending towards the anterior part of the eyeball, it is thick in nature and it is called as the ciliary body. The ciliary body continues forward to form a pigmented and opaque structure called the iris. So if you can see here, this ciliary body extends further to form an opaque structure which is called as the iris. And this opaque structure, it is pigmented and it is called as the iris. And this is the visible colored portion of the eye. So because what you see, it is nothing but the iris. You cannot see all the other parts. You cannot see the other parts of the eye, but iris is the one that is pigmented and it is visible to us. So this is about the structure of the eye. So what are the three membranes the eye is made up of? It is made up of the outer membrane called as sclera. Then the sclera extends to form anteriorly to form the cornea, which forms the second layer. Then the middle layer is nothing but it is called as the choroid, and the middle layer choroid is thin, and that thin choroid layer covers 2/3 of the eyeball, and this thin layer extends further to the anterior region of the eye where it forms the ciliary body and it is thick, and apart from that this ciliary body extends further to form a pigmented or a colored and opaque structure which is called as the iris. And later on we have the second part I told you, cornea. Then after that the iris that is there, it is the part that is actually visible and it is pigmented and it is the colored portion of the eye. And the inner layer is the retina and it contains, so outer layer was sclera, that sclera extended to form anterior region, that is cornea. Middle layer is the choroid, inner layer is the retina. Don't get confused. Again, if you want, I'll tell you, the outer layer was sclera. Outer layer. So, outer layer is sclera. Now, this sclera, if you just look at this sclera, which is the outer layer, it extends like this and it forms, anteriorly it forms one more layer which is called as cornea. Cornea is also outer layer itself. Next, what was the middle layer? Middle layer was choroid. And this layer was blue in color. Why was it blue in color? Because it had a lot of blood vessels. Now this choroid, there is both thick choroid and thin choroid. Thin choroid is present around the eyeball and it covers 2/3 of the eyeball. This thin choroid extends further to form a thick choroid which is called as, which is called as ciliary body. This ciliary body extends further to form the iris. Now iris is the visible part of the eye and it is opaque and it is pigmented and all that. Next, after that we are studying about the inner layer. Inner layer, what is it made up of? It is made up of retina. So the inner layer is made up of the retina. So this portion, if you can see this portion, it is nothing but the inner layer which is made up of retina. So this retina contains again 3 layers. What are they? It is made up of neural cells from inside to outside and they are called as ganglion cells. The inner layer is called as the ganglion cell. The middle layer is called as the bipolar cell and the outer layer is called as the photoreceptor cells. So what are they made up of? They are made up of, it's not shown in this diagram, but you need to remember the retina is the innermost layer of the eye and this layer is again divided into 3 layers wherein, and what are these 3 layers made up of? They are made up of neural cells. And the innermost layer is made up of ganglion cells, the middle layer is made up of the bipolar cells and the outermost layer is made up of the photoreceptor cells. Now, there are again the photoreceptor cells. What is the photoreceptor cells? They are the outermost layer of the retina. And what is retina? Retina is the innermost layer of the eye. Now, these photoreceptor cells again, they are of 2 types. And they are called as rods and cones. These are the one that actually perceives the images. So these cells, that is the rods and the cones, they contain the light sensitive proteins called as the photopigments. So they have some light sensitive proteins called as photopigments. And the daylight vision, which is called as photopic vision, and colorless vision are the functions of the cones. So what are the functions of the cones? The functions of the cones are to receive the daylight vision or to project the daylight vision and to provide color vision. And the twilight vision, or somewhat when the light availability is not there or it is dim, the twilight vision is the function of the rods. Of course, right? It is not that we can only see when there is bright light. Even when the light is dim also, after a minute or 2, we can read well, read the books well, we can see images properly, right? That is because of the rods. So, when there is bright light, the cones function giving us a colored image, and when there is twilight or dim light, the rods function. Where are the cones and rods present? They are nothing but the two types of photoreceptor cells which are present in the outside layer of the retina. So this is about the eye. Moving further, the rods contain. So what are the functions of the rods? Rods, they help in daylight vision. That is, they help for us to see things during the daylight and also to get a colored vision. Now the rods contain purplish red protein which is called as rhodopsin, or it is also called as visual purple. And this actually, it is a derivative of vitamin A. That is why they suggest that vitamin A is good for color. And those who are deficient of vitamin A are at the risk of being color blind, because rods are responsible for providing a color vision. And in that, white provides a color vision because it contains a purplish red protein which is called as rhodopsin, or that rhodopsin is also called as visual purple, and that visual purple or rhodopsin protein is nothing but a derivative of vitamin A. So if you take enough of vitamin A, then only this rhodopsin protein will get produced properly. So that is the reason. And if this rhodopsin protein gets produced properly, then the photoreceptor cells can receive the images very well and give you a colored image. Otherwise, the image will appear black and white. And in the human eye, there are three types of cones which possess their own characteristic photopigments that respond to red, green and blue lights. What are cones? Cones are also a kind of photoreceptor cells which are present on the external layer of the retina. So what are these made up of? What photopigments are the cones made up of? They are made up of photopigments which help our eyes to respond to red, green and the blue lights. And the sensation of different colors are produced by various combinations of these cones and their photopigments. So cones actually helps us to perceive different colors, because cones have photopigments which respond to different colors such as red, green and blue lights. And when these cones are stimulated equally, a sensation of white light is produced. And the optic nerves, they leave the eye and the retinal blood vessels enter it at a point medial to slightly above the posterior pole of the eyeball. So here what happens? The optic nerves that leaves the eye and the retinal blood vessels entering the eye. So here also there is one kind of nerve that is leaving the eye and the one kind of nerve that is entering into the eye. So leaving the eye, entering into the eye, mean don't think it is outside. It is just that one connected to the central nervous system, the other from the central nervous system to the eye. So photoreceptor cells are not present in that region and hence it is called as the blind spot. So there is a blind spot where no image is being formed. So this particular region, why there is no image being formed here? Because it is in this region that the optic nerve enters and leaves the eye. So that is why that particular region, if you can see here in this particular region, there is no membrane, anything that is not present there. So that is why images are not created at that particular region and therefore it is called as the blind spot. And at the posterior pole of the eye, lateral to the blind spot, there is a yellow pigmented spot which is called as macula lutea with a central pit called the fovea. So there is presence of a fovea. If you can see, as we move posterior, there is presence of a layer or a yellowish pigmented spot which is called as macula lutea. And in this macula lutea, it has a central pit, if you can see, which is called as the fovea. So the fovea that is there, so what is a fovea? Fovea is the central pit that is formed in a yellowish pigmented surface or spot that is present just above the blind spot in the eye. So this fovea, it is thinned out portion of the retina where only the cones are densely packed. So this fovea is nothing but it is the thin portion of the retina. So if you can see here, this retina continues like this and it is a thin portion. Can you see this part? Because there is presence of a pit here, the portion is thin. So therefore it is a thin portion of the retina. So this thin portion of the retina, here only cones are present. Rods are not present. So it contains densely packed cones, and it is the point where the visual activity, that is the visual acuity or the resolution of the images is done. It is the greatest. So the optic nerve leaves the eye and the retinal blood vessels enter it at a point medial to and slightly above the posterior pole of the eyeball. So this is the anterior portion of the eyeball, this is the posterior portion of the eyeball. So you can see the optic nerve leaving the eye and entering into the eye in the posterior portion of the eyeball, where just below the medulla lacuna or the point medial or just below the foveal region. And the photoreceptor cells are not present in that region, and hence it is called as the blind spot. We had studied about that, right? Because here photoreceptor cells are not present. Why photoreceptor cells are not present here? Because there is no membrane here. Why no membrane in this particular region? Because it is in this particular region the optic nerves, they enter and leave the eye. So that is why there is a gap here. So that is why no images are formed there, and hence it is called as the blind spot. Next, there is a space between the cornea and the lens, and it is called as the aqueous chamber. So between the cornea and the lens, if you can see the cornea, what is the cornea? Cornea is the extension of the sclera, right? Sclera is the outermost layer of the eye. The sclera extends posteriorly to form a cornea, and between the cornea and the lens you can see a fluid filled chamber which is called as the aqueous chamber. And this aqueous chamber actually contains a thin watery fluid which is called as aqueous humor. What is there in this aqueous chamber? It contains aqueous humor. What is this aqueous humor? It is nothing but a thin liquid coat that is there, which is called as the aqueous humor. That is true, right? If you can feel that watery substance in your eye, where is it present? It is present between the cornea and the lens. It is called as the aqueous chamber because it is filled with a fluid called as aqueous humor. And the space between the lens and the retina is called as the vitreous chamber. So space between lens, the space between the lens and the retina, it is called as the vitreous chamber. This entire space, where is it present? Between the lens and between the retina. It is called as vitreous chamber, and it is filled with a transparent gel called as vitreous humor. What is there in this? A transparent gel called as vitreous humor. Don't get confused. Aqueous humor is a fluid filled substance that is present between the cornea and the lens, and vitreous humor is the fluid filled substance that is present between the lens and the retina, and that region is called as the vitreous chamber. So next, this was about the structure of the eye. So next, let us study about the mechanism of vision. How exactly the vision is formed, because we know what is the structure of the eye, where exactly the different parts of the eye are situated. Now it will be easy for us to understand the mechanism of vision. So the light rays that is falling on our eye, it is visible wavelength focused on the retina through the cornea. That's true, right? So the visible wavelength of the light that falls on the eye, first it falls on the cornea. Then it will enter into the lens and it will generate impulses, and then it will generate impulses in the rods and the cones. Why? Because the rods are the ones that receives or creates images in the daylight or helps in vision in the daylight, and during twilight the cones help in vision. So that is why when light rays in visible wavelength, it falls on the retina. Before reaching the retina, where it should fall? It will fall on the cornea. From the cornea, it will enter into the retina, and then it will enter into the lens, wherein it will generate impulses in the rods and the cones. And so as you can see here, light rays that falls on the cornea. From the cornea, it will enter into through the lens and then into the retina portion. So now, what is there in the retina portion? The rods and the cones. And the photosensitive compounds, that is photopigments, right? Photopigments are present both in the rods and in the cones. In the rods, photopigment is present, which is made up of a protein that corresponds to vitamin A. In the cones, different color photopigments are present that corresponds to red, green and blue light, right? We had studied in the previous slide. Now, and it is composed of opsin, which is a protein, and retinal, which is an aldehyde of vitamin A. So, we had studied. So, the photosensitive compounds in the human eye is composed of opsin, which is a protein, and retinal, which is an aldehyde of vitamin A. Now, we know that the light has fallen on the cornea, it has entered into the lens and then into the retina, wherein it will be perceived in the form of impulses by the cones and the rods that are present in the retina, and these that is light is received by the pigments or the proteins called as the retinal and the opsin present in the cones and the rods. Now, this light that is falling, it induces dissociation of the retinal from opsin, resulting in changes in the structure of the opsin. Now, as the light enters into the retina, what is there? Opsin is there, right? Opsin is a protein that is present there. That opsin gets dissociated and this will cause the membrane permeability changes. When the membrane permeability changes occurs, a lot of differences are generated in the photoreceptor cells, and these differences produces a signal that generates action potential in the ganglion cells through the bipolar cells. Now, all this takes place in the retina part. So, here what happens, once the light falls on the cornea, it enters into the lens, from the lens into the retina. In the retina, the rods and cones that are there, they will generate impulses because of the presence of proteins such as the retinal and the opsin. Now, what happens here is, once the light falls or it is perceived by or it is received by the retinal and opsin, the dissociation of the retinal from the opsin will take place. This will cause some structural changes to occur in the opsin. Once the structural changes occur in the opsin means, what happens? It is nothing but structural changes occurring in the protein of the retina or in the membrane of the retina itself or in the retinal layer. So, therefore, it will change the permeability of that particular membrane. So, when the membrane permeability changes, it will cause a lot of potential differences in the photoreceptor cells that are there. So, photoreceptor cells are nothing but the rods and the cones themselves, right? So, this produces a signal and that signal will actually generate an action potential in the ganglion cells through the bipolar cells. So much happens in the case of the eye here. So, next what happens we shall look into. So, these action potentials or impulses, they then get transmitted by the optic nerves. Where are the optic nerves present? Right behind the blind spot. So, they get transmitted via the optic nerves to where? To the brain, because the brain has to perceive the image there. So, that is why to the visual cortex area of the brain, where the neural impulses are analyzed and the image that is formed on the retina is recognized based on earlier memory and experience. So, that is why it is connected to the cerebral region of a brain where the images are perceived. So much process actually occurs in this particular eye. So, for everything, an action potential has to get created. An impulse has to get created. A signal has to form. That is sent by the optic nerves to the visual cortex area of the brain, which is responsible for creating the vision, the images and all that. And from there, the neural images are analyzed and that neural images are sent back to the retina where it is recognized based on the earlier memory. So, that will be stored, that image will be stored in the brain, that will be recognized by the retina. So, that is how we can see. Right now, I am looking like this and within a span of second, I am seeing everything, but this is the process that is actually occurring there in the eye. So, that is about the process that occurs for us to get a proper vision. So, this is the mechanism of vision. So this was about this particular session wherein we discussed about the reflex action and the reflex arc, and we also studied about the sense organs, and in that in detail we'll studied about the different parts of the eye and the mechanism of the vision, how exactly the vision is being created. So be it any organ, at the end it is connected to the brain, and the brain is the one that perceives everything and sends back the messages to the respective organs. So I hope you understood this session well. In the coming session, we shall study about the structure of one more sense organ, that is the ear, in detail, and also we shall study about the mechanism of hearing. So we shall meet again in the coming session. Thank you.